Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. If you're new here, consider subscribing. It really helps keep these stories coming. And while you're here, let me know in the comments where you're listening from. Now, sit back, relax, and let's get into the story. I was eating a cold can of beans when the broadcast cut in. It started with that jarring tone, the same one I'd heard during storm warnings, school closures, and a few times before the world had gone quiet. But this wasn't just a test. The TV I had rigged to pick up the emergency frequencies came to life with a flickering green screen and white block letters. Emergency alert. Do not leave your bunker. The zombies have mutated. I dropped my spoon. The voice that followed didn't sound like a trained announcer. It was shaky, breathless, human, real. This is not a drill, the voice said. If you are receiving this, remain in your shelter. Do not engage, do not approach. They have changed. That was all before the signal was swallowed by static. I hadn't heard a broadcast in weeks, not since the last known outpost up north went dark. I'd assumed no one was left to send out warnings. No one to monitor signals, patch frequencies, or talk into a mic, but someone had. And they sounded terrified. I live alone in an underground bunker, built for an entirely different kind of disaster. My dad had poured years into it back when people thought the worst thing that could happen was another war. He didn't plan for the world to be taken over by things that used to be people. He passed before all this happened, before the world turned upside down. But I always remembered his words. If it hits the fan, lock the hatch and stay put. Don't be a hero. That advice had kept me alive this long. The bunker had 4 rooms: a sleeping area, a pantry, a utility room with backup power and filtration, and a radio station I'd pieced together from old parts. It wasn't glamorous, but it was safe. At least, it used to be. The first outbreak had caught everyone off guard. People didn't take it seriously until the big cities went dark. The things that rose from the chaos weren't like the stories from fiction. They didn't groan. They didn't shuffle. They were fast, focused, and worst of all, relentless. But they could be avoided, at least back then. The voice on the broadcast had said something new, something that chilled me even more than the silence I'd grown used to. They've changed. I turned up the volume, nothing but static. Then I checked the outer camera feed. I hadn't seen movement above ground in days, maybe longer. The last one that wandered past the hatch had moved in a zigzag, confused and twitchy, like the infection had shorted out its brain. But now there were shadows. 3 of them. They were standing still. That alone was enough to spike my pulse. Zombies didn't stand still. They paced, they fumbled, they clawed at anything that made noise, but they were waiting, watching, like they knew where the camera was. I sat back in my chair, heart pounding. Maybe it was just paranoia. Maybe it was coincidence. Or maybe the voice was right. They had changed. They didn't move for almost 10 minutes. I watched through the grainy black and white camera feed, eyes glued to the screen, afraid to blink. The 3 figures stood just beyond the rusted fence line, close enough to see, but far enough to avoid the perimeter alarms. They were tall. One of them had something slung over its back, a long shape. It looked like a stick? No. A spear? I leaned in closer. That's when the one in the center tilted its head, slowly, deliberately, right at the camera. I jerked back like it could see me through the screen. But that wasn't how they worked, was it? The ones I remembered didn't have enough awareness left in their heads to focus on anything. They reacted to noise, light, and scent. They didn't track cameras. They didn't stand still like they were waiting for a command. And they didn't carry weapons. I forced myself to breathe slow and quiet, listening to the hum of the air filter in the background. My mind raced with questions I didn't want to answer. What did the broadcast mean by mutated? Smarter, stronger, organized? The three figures began to move, but not toward the bunker. They turned as one, slipping into the tree line like shadows, their outlines melting into the gray fog above. They didn't look back. I stayed frozen for a while, the static from the feed hissing in my ears. Then, cautiously, I switched over to the shortwave radio. Nothing but static. I tried the emergency bands, then the civilian bands, then the one I wasn't supposed to use, the encrypted one, the one I'd only ever picked up once, months ago, when someone whispered, "Sector 9 is gone." Tonight, there was a signal. Repeat, if you're in the northern zones, do not travel. They're testing behaviors. They watch longer. They mimic. They learn. We are down to 13. We will broadcast again when it's safe. Don't go topside. Don't trust voices. They're using voices now. The transmission cut out. No static this time, just silence. I stared at the panel, gripping the mic like I was waiting for a response. I wasn't in the northern zones. Not exactly, but I wasn't far either. Close enough that whatever these things were, they'd found their way here. I pushed my chair back and stood, pacing the cramped floor of the bunker. I passed the pantry, touched the edge of the locked weapons locker, and circled back to the monitor. Still no movement. Just the empty fence line and fog curling through the trees. Then came the knock. 3 slow taps on the main hatch. My blood turned to ice. No one should have known where the entrance was. I'd covered it with debris, hidden the outline beneath branches, dirt, and stone. Even in daylight, it was nearly invisible. No one, nothing, should have been able to find it. Another knock. This time, softer, almost polite. I crept toward the hatch room, footsteps muffled against the bunker's worn carpet. My heart pounded so loud I was sure they could hear it. And then a voice called out, "Hey, it's me. Open up. I know you're in there." It was my voice, perfectly mimicked. I staggered back like the hatch had bitten me. That voice wasn't just similar, it was exact. My pitch, my tone, the slight rasp I get when I haven't spoken in a while. It even had that weird inflection I use when I'm trying to sound calm, but I'm actually falling apart inside. I didn't respond, didn't move. Just stood there, staring at the steel hatch like it might melt open. Then the voice spoke again. Still calm. Still mine. "Listen, I know this is strange, but something went wrong up top. I need you to let me in." Silence followed. A silence so thick it felt like the air itself was holding its breath. And then a laugh. A soft, humorless chuckle that faded too quickly to be human. I backed into the corner of the hatch room, and fumbling for the emergency panel. I tapped in the override to activate the secondary security locks, big hydraulic bars that clamped across the inside of the door like the jaws of a trap. If they wanted in, they'd need more than tricks. The voice stopped. For a moment, I let myself think it was over. That maybe it had moved on. Maybe it realized the act wouldn't work. Then, something scraped against the hatch. Metal on metal. I raced to the main monitor and flipped through the cameras. The outer hatch cam was blurry, interference maybe. Or maybe they'd figured out how to mess with the signal. But I could just make out a figure crouched near the door, head tilted, mouth unmoving. The voice came again, but now it echoed through the vents. "I know everything about you." My hand slammed the mute on the speakers. The vents weren't connected to the outside, at least not directly. They were designed to pull filtered air through underground tubes, long, narrow, and sealed tight. But something was still managing to speak through them. I scrambled into the utility room and checked the intake pipe. It looked intact, no breaches, no signs of tampering, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being listened to from the other side. The words hadn't come through the door. They'd come from inside the system. That's when I realized what the broadcast meant by, "They're using voices now." They didn't just mimic, they studied, they remembered, they repeated, and somehow they were stealing voices from people they'd seen or heard, or maybe from people they'd taken. Back in the monitor room, the hatch cam was now completely black. Not off, just blocked. Something was covering the lens. I switched to the motion sensors. Still, no movement, as if whatever was outside could choose when to be seen. For hours I sat in the dark, every light off but the dim glow of the battery backup system. I didn't eat, didn't sleep, I just watched. Eventually, the interference cleared, the camera blinked back to life. The hatch was empty. Whatever had come was gone. But it had left something behind. On the feed, I saw a symbol drawn into the dirt just beyond the door. A spiral, jagged and sharp. I didn't recognize it, but my instincts recoiled. Something about it felt wrong. Like it wasn't just a message, it was a signature. The voice hadn't come back, not yet. But something had changed in the air down here. The quiet didn't feel safe anymore. It felt like a pause. Like the space between breaths before something terrible happens. I couldn't stop staring at that spiral. It was still there the next morning, etched into the dirt outside the hatch. Clean lines, purposeful. It wasn't random scrawling or claw marks. Someone or something had drawn it with intent. But what did it mean? I dug out one of Dad's old notebooks from the utility shelf. He'd kept records, symbols from other survivalists, old military signs, radio codes. But there was nothing that looked like this, nothing even close. Just a single sentence in his handwriting that I hadn't noticed before, scribbled in the corner of one page. If they start using symbols, it's already too late. That shook me harder than the fake voice. What had Dad known? What had he prepared for that I hadn't? I scanned through the rest of his notes but found nothing else, just old warnings and equipment schematics. Still, that sentence gnawed at me. If they start using symbols. The next hours passed in a haze. I checked the monitors, checked the sensors, rechecked the food stores, the water levels, the pressure gauges. I needed to keep busy, because if I stopped moving, I'd start listening again. And I didn't want to hear that voice come back. But it did. Not through the vents this time. Through the radio. I'd been idly scanning channels when the static broke apart, and something familiar leaked through. "You there? Please come in. I'm safe. I found a clean zone." Repeat, "I found a clean zone. Respond." The voice sounded human, young, desperate. I hovered over the mic. It could have been someone real, maybe even someone like me, alone, scared, hanging on. But I'd already heard what they could do with voices. So I waited. Seconds ticked by. Then the voice said something strange. "I saw your face yesterday. You were watching from the camera. You looked tired." I dropped the mic. The camera feed wasn't connected to any transmitter. It was a closed circuit. No outgoing signal, no uplink, no chance anyone could have seen me. Unless they were down here already. I backed away from the radio, slowly, carefully. I checked every hatch, every seal, every sensor. Nothing breached, nothing disturbed. Still locked, still safe. And yet I couldn't shake the feeling I wasn't alone anymore. That night, I dreamed of spirals. They weren't drawn on the ground anymore. They were burned into the walls, into skin, into bone. The faces in the dream weren't human, not really. They wore masks of flesh and walked with a sway that wasn't quite natural. One of them reached out and touched my chest. I woke up gasping. There was something under my shirt. I tore off my hoodie, heart racing. There, pressed against my skin like a welt, was the faint red outline of a spiral. I hadn't left the bunker. Nothing had gotten in. And yet, something had touched me. I ran to the mirror in the utility room, turned sideways and twisted to get a better look. It wasn't a scratch, it wasn't a bruise. It looked like a brand, but I hadn't felt anything. No pain, no heat, just pressure. Like something had marked me in my sleep. The spiral was getting clearer with each passing hour, and even worse, I began to feel it pulse. Not physically, but mentally, like a thought that wasn't mine, whispering in the corners of my mind. I tried to drown it out with music, with noise, with shouting, but the spiral didn't care. It had already found a way in. I stopped sleeping. Not because I wanted to, but because every time I closed my eyes, I could feel it waiting. The spiral. It wasn't just a shape anymore. It was a rhythm, a message, a kind of pattern that burrowed deeper the longer I looked at it, like a song stuck in your head, except it wasn't a song. It was a feeling, a pull, like gravity, but wrong. I turned off the main screen, but I still saw it in the dark. I covered the mirror, but I still felt it pulsing beneath my skin. It didn't hurt, that was the worst part. It didn't force anything. It just waited, calm, patient, like it knew I'd eventually follow. But I wasn't ready to lose my grip, not yet. I switched on the emergency journal recorder and started talking out loud. I figured if I could keep speaking in my own voice, I could hold on to something real. Day unknown, I muttered. The spiral symbol is now visible on my chest. I haven't left the bunker. I haven't been touched. I don't know how it got there. I hesitated. I don't know if I'm still alone. I heard a thump just as I said it, not from the hatch. From beneath the floor, I froze. Another thump, slow, methodical, like footsteps muffled through cement and steel. That was impossible. The bunker had no sublevel, no tunnels, just a reinforced foundation and dirt for 10 feet in every direction. I pressed my ear to the floor. Silence. Then a whisper, not a word, just breath from below. I jumped back and scrambled for the breaker panel. Every instinct told me to power down. Kill the lights, go full lockdown. But my hand wouldn't move. It wasn't fear holding me back. It was something stranger, a calm, a creeping sense of why bother. The spiral again. It was working its way into my thoughts now, twisting logic into something that felt reasonable even when I knew it wasn't. I grabbed a roll of duct tape and covered the spiral on my chest. It didn't help. I could still feel it. Not burning, pulsing, like a second heartbeat. I went back to the monitors. The outside cam was normal. Trees, wind, dirt, and then movement. Something stood at the tree line. Not a person. Not one of the old kind either. This thing was taller, thinner. Its arms dangled low, fingertips brushing the ground. Its face was stretched like melted wax, but its eyes, if they were eyes, were locked straight at the camera. It didn't move like the others. It didn't stumble or drag its feet. It stood like it was aware of the lens, aware of me. I switched cameras. Another figure, closer now, standing near the emergency exhaust vent. Then another, just outside the water intake valve. They were surrounding the bunker. No alarms had gone off, no proximity alerts. Somehow, they'd bypassed every tripwire, every heat sensor. I stared at the screen and whispered, "How did you find me?" The radio crackled to life. "We never lost you." This time, the voice wasn't mine. It was Dad's. I don't remember sitting down, but I found myself slumped in the chair, radio mic shaking in my hand. Dad had been gone for years. He never made it to the bunker the day everything fell apart. I waited 2 full days before sealing the hatch, hoping, praying he'd show up, but he never did. I told myself he didn't make it. That was easier than imagining him out there, wandering, changing. But now his voice was whispering through the radio. "I'm proud of you," it said. "You followed the rules. You stayed hidden." It was the exact way he used to speak to me as a kid, calm, firm, no wasted words. Only it was off somehow, just slightly, like hearing a song in the wrong key. "You've done well," the voice continued. "Now open the hatch." I reached toward the control panel without meaning to. My fingers hovered over the override. The spiral beneath the tape burned, sharp and sudden. It jolted me back. I ripped the tape off and ran to the far corner of the bunker where I kept the old battery-powered recorder. I needed a sound that was mine, unaltered. I played the oldest entry in the log, a recording of Dad's last real message from years ago, just before everything collapsed. His voice in the recording was strained, tired, real. "This is the last time I'll call. Don't wait for me. Seal the door. Trust no one." I let that echo in the room. Then I shut the radio off. The fake voice didn't come back, but I could feel its disappointment, like it knew the performance hadn't worked. I checked the outside cams again. All 3 of the figures were gone. But the spiral in the dirt had grown. It now spanned the entire clearing in front of the hatch, stretching outward in jagged loops like roots or veins. It didn't make sense. There was no time for that, no tools. Nothing that could have moved that fast, unless it wasn't drawn, unless it was growing. I locked every panel, sealed the intake vents, powered down everything but the essentials. Then I heard it again. A thump beneath the floor, but this time it wasn't alone. Another, then dozens. Footsteps. Something was directly beneath the bunker now. Something walking in circles below the cement. I ran to the utility room, dropped to my knees, and pounded on the floor. It was solid, always had been. Except now. Now it sounded hollow. I traced the seams between panels and found one that wasn't quite flush with the others. A perfect rectangle, about 4 feet across. Dust gathered around the edges like it hadn't been disturbed in years. There wasn't supposed to be a basement, but the spiral had changed the rules. I pulled open the hidden hatch. It led to a steep ladder descending into blackness. The air that came up was dry, old, stale like it hadn't moved in decades. At the bottom, I could just make out the glint of metal. Another door. This one wasn't part of the original plans. It wasn't military issue, it was etched, covered in carvings, every inch of it filled with spirals, some sharp, some curved, all converging at a single point. A center. And at the very center, burned into the steel like a warning. "You've already opened the first door." I stared at that door for what felt like hours. It didn't look old, not like the rest of the bunker. This wasn't built with the place. It was part of something older, like it had been waiting beneath the concrete all along, hidden by design. And now the spiral had revealed it. The words etched into the metal echoed through my mind. "You've already opened the first door." What did that mean? Had I triggered something by noticing the spiral? By hearing the voice? Was it already too late? I should have sealed the panel and walked away, but I didn't. Something in me needed to know. I placed my hand on the carvings, half expecting it to be ice cold, but the metal was warm. It pulsed once. Then the door opened on its own. No creak, no sound. Just a quiet slide into darkness. A tunnel stretched beyond. The walls were smooth, unnaturally so, like they'd been melted into shape. The spirals continued inside, but here, they glowed faintly with a pale amber light, not painted, not wired, just alive. I stepped in. The air changed immediately, heavier, like it was being breathed by something deep below. I followed the tunnel, step by step, each footfall sounding distant and warped, like the tunnel was bending time around me. Then I reached the chamber. A circular room, 30 feet across, lined with symbols and carvings. In the center, a spiral was carved into the floor, massive, perfect, and filled with movement. I don't mean it looked like it moved, it was moving. The stone shifted, flowing in a slow hypnotic rotation, even though there were no seams, no gaps, just solid rock turning on its own. Above it hung something suspended in midair, glowing faintly. A heart, or something shaped like one. It beat slowly, pulsing with the same rhythm I felt in my chest. I reached out before I could stop myself. And when my fingers brushed the air around it, the spiral beneath my skin ignited with heat. I fell to my knees as the room filled with a low, humming sound, like thousands of voices humming a single endless note. Then I saw them. Not on walls, not on cameras. In my mind. Figures, tall, thin, eyeless. Wrapped in spirals, not as markings, but as limbs. Arms that coiled and uncoiled without end. Their mouths didn't move, but I heard them speak inside me. "You have seen too much." I backed away. "You were meant to wait." The spirals on the wall began spinning faster. The entire chamber started to tilt, or maybe the world was tilting. I couldn't tell anymore. "You called us with your mind. Now you cannot uncall." I turned and ran. Back down the tunnel, heart hammering. The door at the top of the ladder slammed shut behind me the moment I scrambled through. Sealed, locked, gone, as if it had never been open. I sat on the bunker floor, shaking, struggling to breathe. The spiral on my chest had stopped pulsing, but now it glowed, faintly, just like the ones below. I thought sealing the hatch would buy me time. I was wrong. That glow on my chest never faded. It hummed now, constantly, like a tiny engine spinning just beneath the surface. It didn't hurt. It didn't burn. It just reminded me, minute by minute, that something had been set in motion. Something that couldn't be undone. The outside cameras were still dead. The only thing I could see were flashes of movement. Too quick to capture, like shadows skipping across broken film. But I could feel them. Not the old ones. Not the classic infected. The ones who banged on metal and clawed at glass. No. These were quiet. They didn't come to break in. They came to wait. I checked the food stores again. Still enough for weeks, maybe months. But I barely ate. My appetite was gone, not from fear, something else. Like I didn't need food the same way anymore. Or like I was being fed by something else. I kept recording. It helped to hear my own voice, even if the words sounded less like mine with every entry. "Still alive," I whispered. "Still sealed in. The spiral chamber hasn't reopened. I haven't dreamed in 6 nights. I no longer see my own reflection." The last one slipped out before I could stop it. It was true. I'd passed the mirror in the hygiene module and saw nothing. Not a shadow, not a silhouette, just the room behind me. Like my body was still there, but something else had left. I powered on the emergency uplink. It was never meant to broadcast far, just a beacon, a final ping to anyone still listening. Static, then a crackle, a new voice. One I hadn't heard before, not mine, not my dad's. It was deep, not loud but close. "You've been chosen." I leaned in, trembling. For what? For the next phase. I tried to speak again, but the radio flared with a sudden burst of heat, glowing red, then dimming as a low vibration rolled through the bunker floor. From beneath, the spiral door was opening again. Only this time, I didn't move. I didn't need to, because the spiral wasn't down there anymore. It was here, on every wall, pulsing faintly, curling across the ceiling and floor, reshaping the very metal of the bunker into curves, into loops, into coils. This place was no longer a shelter. It was a gateway. The air shifted, the pressure dropped, and something began rising up the ladder from the depths. I didn't hear it climb, I felt it, like my own bones remembered it from long ago. The last thing I saw before the lights went out completely was a single shape, crawling into view. Tall, thin, fingers that brushed the floor. Its body was wrapped in spirals, and in its chest, glowing where a heart should be, was a symbol I recognized. The same one on mine. It looked at me, no eyes, no face, and I understood without words. The outbreak was just the signal. The real change was in us. This wasn't about survival anymore. It was about transformation. My final recording will loop until power dies. It's still broadcasting, repeating one last message over and over. Do not leave your bunker. Do not follow the spiral. Do not listen when it speaks in familiar voices. This was never a virus. This was a call. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe. Your support keeps these creepypastas coming. Until next time, stay alert, stay safe, and never ignore the feeling that something is watching.